This is a perfect video for you in order for you guys to decide whether you want to perhaps pursue a older generation Nikon D7100 or perhaps upgrade to the D7200. So without any further ado, let's get right into this camera comparison. Now, in terms of the design and form factor, they're identical in pretty much every way. Unfortunately, Nikon hasn't really done anything to change anything in terms of physical dimensions or any button layout configuration from the older generation camera to the new D7200. In fact, to really tell the differences between the two physically, you just have a little badge saying D7200 instead of D7100, and then you have a little Wi-Fi logo on the side as well. And the same thing goes for durability and build quality. They're both made out of magnesium alloy, both are weather sealed, and both have a life expectancy of over 150,000 shutter actuations. The similarities also continue on internally. They both have a very similar sensor, both exactly the same size and resolution of 24 megapixels. But one thing that is different is the internal processing unit. Now, the D7200 is using Nikon's latest X-Speed 4 processor, which is about 30% faster than the previous generation X-Speed 3 processor that's in the D7100. With that faster chip, what you're going to find is your autofocusing speed, metering capabilities are going to happen faster, as well as you're going to have a larger frame buffer. Now, in addition to the new processor, we do have a better ISO sensitivity. The D7100 ISO range was about 100 to 6400. In the extended mode, you can go up to 25,600. But now in the new camera, it can go from 100 to 25,600 just in the normal ISO range. And the extended modes can go up to over 50,000 and over 100,000 ISO, which is certainly impressive. We're going to see later on in this video whether the new camera does produce cleaner overall images at the same ISO rating. Now, in terms of viewfinder, both have 100% coverage, which is fantastic. In terms of the rear mounted display, is pretty much identical in every way. Unfortunately, we do not have any touchscreen capabilities in the new camera, as well as no articulation. You're going to have to go to the D5500 if you want those kind of features. Now, unfortunately, the burst mode from the D7200 hasn't really changed. You're both looking at 6 frames per second in normal mode and about 7 frames per second in a 1.3 crop mode on both cameras. We do not have a higher frame rate on the new camera, but what has changed is a bigger frame buffer. So at maximum burst mode, if you're shooting 14-bit RAW files, you can get up to 18 shots versus the D7100 ran out of steam after about 6 shots. So definitely a large improvement there. Excellent if you're a sports photographer or if you shoot any fast-moving objects. Now, both cameras have a very similar autofocusing system. They both have 51 points, with 15 points being cross-type enabled. Additionally, you do have better autofocusing capabilities in low light on the D7200, so it provides faster and more reliable autofocusing system, especially in lower light conditions, up to -3 EV conditions versus the previous generation was rated for -2 EV conditions. Now, another minor difference between the two is regarding any of you time-lapse photographers out there. Basically, the intervalometer built into these two cameras can go up to 10,000 intervals on the D7200 versus the older generation camera stopped around 1,000 intervals. So that's great if you're a time-lapse photographer. You can shoot for longer periods of time on the new camera without having to buy a proper intervalometer. Now, the physical ports on these two cameras have not changed at all, with the exception that now you have built-in Wi-Fi capabilities with near-field communication built into the new D7200 versus the older generation camera. You're going to have to buy a Wi-Fi dongle to enable the Wi-Fi connectivity. So if you are going to shoot with your smartphone for remote capturing and remote shooting mode, that's definitely nice to see on the new camera. Now, thankfully, in terms of battery performance, we do see a minor improvement on the D7200. It can now shoot up to 1100 stills and about 80 minutes of video on a single charge versus the older generation camera topped out around 950 shots. So that's about a 15% improvement in terms of battery life. Now, with all that kind of spec stuff out of the way, let's finally get into some image quality differences between the two. We're going to first take a look at the stills capabilities, and that way you can see which camera looks better to you. Now, from my perspective over here, basically they're identical in terms of raw image quality. You're looking at a very similar camera in terms of the sharpness, color rendition, and overall accuracy. You're not really finding a major difference between one camera to the next. So if you're going to buy the D7200 for the raw image quality, save your money, get the D7100. Now, both of the cameras render out really fine details fantastically because they don't have a optical low pass filter, and that's really going to produce some very sharp looking images that is going to preserve many of your details very nicely without having to do any post sharpening. Now, in terms of the ISO performance, shooting JPEG on both of these cameras, we do find a minor difference between the two. I would say generally that the D7200 at the same ISO setting is going to render out images a little bit more cleaner than you would typically find on the D7100, and it's certainly not going to be apparent when you're distributing your photos throughout the web and things like that. But if you are going to be printing your photos in large, big scales, you are going to notice that minor difference between the D7200 being a little bit more cleaner. Now, that being said, the D7200 can do 50 to 100,000 ISO, and that's not really usable for pretty much any application out there besides utilitarian. In most cases, you're going to be sticking with ISO 12,800 and lower for anything that's going to be considered to be usable on the D7200. And that's certainly a minor improvement because I would say that after about 6400 ISO, the older generation D7100 certainly tended to break down a little bit. Now, moving on and talk about the video capabilities on these two cameras, we do find a minor improvement on the D7200. Basically, you can now do up to 60 progressive frames per second at 1080p. The downside towards that is that you're going to be stuck at around 1.3 crop mode. Now, the D7100 could do 1080p at 60 frames per second, but only in interlace mode, which is going to give you about half the frames as the progressive mode that you're going to find in the new camera. So it definitely wasn't as clean and as sharp as this camera over here, certainly at the 60 frames per second mark, but you could shoot at 30 or 24 frames per second in full progressive mode. So what we're going to do is stick to 30 frames per second on both cameras at 1080p and see which camera can produce the better looking video footage. Now, as you can see, the video quality is pretty much identical, just like what we saw in the photo capturing capabilities on both of these two cameras. So again, no major improvement there, and the bitrate is very similar on both cameras as well. They both are going to have a moire and aliasing problems because they don't have an optical low pass filter. So you definitely want to be careful that you don't shoot a lot of repeating fine patterns in video mode because you are going to get moire and aliasing issues on both these two cameras. But by far one of the biggest hurdles that Nikon has not improved on the new camera is regarding the aperture control in video mode. You pretty much have to get out of live view mode, change the aperture, and get back into live view mode to shoot a video. And that's certainly upsetting and something that is unacceptable, especially right now where DSLRs should be completely limitless and giving you the full manual control of your aperture in video mode, because a lot of people use DSLRs equally for shooting stills and video, and that issue should have been addressed a long time ago, and sadly it hasn't been done on the D7200. But other than that, guys, that's really it. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if this video helped you out in any ways. Check out the description for more information about each camera, and definitely let me know what you guys think of the new D7200. Do you think it's worth upgrading to? If any of you guys are in the market for a new camera, definitely check out our channel. We have a whole bunch of different comparisons and reviews of all the latest generation cameras that have come out. So for more knowledge and more information, definitely check out those videos. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.